All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's presentation. We have two fabulous speakers joining us today, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome Tim Moore, Acting Chief of Interpretation for Minuteman National Historical Park, and also Ken Bigley, Deputy Superintendent of Wolf Trap National Park for the Performing Arts. So Tim and Ken, welcome to Ranger Rendezvous 43.0. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Jamie. We're happy to be here. Ken, did you want to get us started? Unmute.
Ken is muted. He might need to stop his presentation. If you stop sharing your screen, there we go. All right.
How's that?
Perfect.
I am so sorry. Well, that's, of course, the official phrase of 2020 that you're on mute. I apologize for that. Thank you all for joining us today. Good afternoon, or I guess good morning if you're joining us from the West Coast. Tim and I just have a brief PowerPoint that we'd like to share just to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things we'll be talking about today. We'll talk a little bit about some of the different hiring authorities, some of the options that may be helpful if you're in a seasonal position looking to get that first permanent job, maybe if you're still looking for that first seasonal job. We are going to blow through the PowerPoint pretty quick because we recognize that all of you are at different places and maybe looking for something a little bit different from this session. So we're going to go through the PowerPoint as quickly as we can. If you do have questions along the way, by all means, we will be happy to take those during the Q&A. And we want to leave most of the time for your questions so that we can have a chance to speak about the things that are important and relevant to you all. A couple disclaimers right off the bat. Tim and I are not, first of all, we're not here in our official capacity. We're here on our own time, just representing our own personal views and our own career experiences with the National Park Service. And we're also not HR experts. I've been a chief of administration, so I've worked with HR. I've dealt with a lot of HR issues over the years. Tim certainly has as a supervisor as well. But we are not HR professionals. So we may be able to give you some ideas and steer you in the right direction. But for any technical questions, of course, you're going to want to reach out to somebody in the HR community. Tim, did you want to add anything before I jump in?
Yeah, just as Ken mentioned, the things we'll share with you today are sort of what we have experienced. Don't necessarily consider whatever we say as the official policy. Always, attend, if you're already in the service, go to the HR trainings on that. Follow all the rules and regs of USA Jobs and that sort of thing. But we're here to try to give you a little behind the scenes of what all that official policy actually happens in reality.
Very good. Thank you, Tim. All right, so as you gathered from the title of the presentation, we view the National Park Service as not just a single career path, but as a menu of options. And that's what we're going to be providing today, is just some of the different paths that you may choose to follow. And you may find that some of what we're saying isn't necessarily relevant to your situation. And one of the messages that I'm going to be stressing throughout this is the importance of talking to lots of different people in different fields with different career experiences and put it together as a potpourri and be able to take from it what you can. I want to start off with a couple of definitions. We'll be referring to these terms over the course of the next hour, so I just wanted to cover that. I know this may be a review for some of you. We'll talk about the two different types of job announcements on USA Jobs. The merit promotion positions, those are the ones that are open to those who are current and former permanent federal employees. In other words, you need to have status to apply for those. We'll also talk about jobs that are open to the public, meaning that they're open to anybody who is a U.S. citizen. We'll sometimes refer to those as all sources announcements. And you'll hear us talk about a cert. A cert is simply a list of those who qualify for the position. So that's a list of names. It's short for Certificate of Eligibles, and that's the list of names that the hiring official will be able to choose from. A few more definitions. We're obviously going to be referring to seasonal jobs. Technically, the term is temporary, not seasonal, but we'll use those more or less interchangeably. Those are positions that are not to exceed 39 hours, which is about a period of 6 months. We'll talk about term positions. Term positions are kind of a hybrid between a seasonal and a permanent. They can be as short as 1 year. They can be extended for up to 4 years. Permanent full-time positions, those are permanent jobs, obviously, that go year-round. And then the career seasonal, which will sometimes be referred to as subject to furlough. A career seasonal, despite the name, actually is a permanent position, but a permanent position that has a certain amount of time in non-pay status. So I just wanted to go over those basics there. You know, if we were doing this presentation 6 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about this next slide. This has been a game changer going back to 2015. The Land Management Workforce Flexibility Act. If you're a seasonal or a volunteer and you're looking for a permanent job in the National Park Service, this is something that you're going to want to become real familiar with. The LMWFA, it doesn't lend itself to an easily pronounceable acronym, but the Land Management Workforce Flexibility Act is really a game changer because for the first time, starting in 2015, all of that service, all of that time that you're spending as a seasonal employee will actually count toward making you eligible for permanent positions. Basically, after you work for 24 months cumulatively in a seasonal position, and as long as you have no more than a 24-month break in service, you are then eligible to apply for merit promotion jobs with the NPS, BLM, and several other agencies. So again, as the slide says, you need 24 months of service cumulatively. You can't have more than a 2-year break in service. Your performance does need to be acceptable during that time, and you need to document those things. So you'll need to hold on to both your SF-50s, your notice of personnel actions, as well as your performance appraisals. This is absolutely a game changer. This is something that has allowed us to get so many great folks who have lots of years of seasonal experience up until 2015. It just didn't give them a way to apply. The details of how this works, we're happy to answer a little bit more in the Q&A, but this is something that you're going to want to be very, very familiar with because it opens up a career path that wasn't there and allows you to put a lot of your seasonal time to good use. If you've served our country in the armed forces, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about this. First of all, thank you if you fall in that category. I would encourage you to look at the website fedshirevets.gov. Veterans preference only applies to the all sources announcements or the ones that are open to all U.S. citizens. And then there are other types of veterans appointments that are mentioned there. We will be happy to talk with you offline or in the Q&A. I won't go into too much detail here, but if these categories do apply to you, if you have that veteran service, that can also open up a lot of opportunities for you looking for federal employment. So definitely be aware of that. There are also several NPS internship programs, which no matter what will get you some really great experience working with some fantastic folks. Some of these programs that are here will can lead to permanent employment. They can lead to non-competitive eligibility. Others don't necessarily have that. But either way, I would encourage you to look at that link, the youth programs link. It'll be in the PowerPoint, which we'll make available. It's also available on the employment page on the ANPR website. This is a fantastic way to get your foot in the door. These are areas that the Park Service has invested a lot in through these internship programs. So this is just a wonderful way to get in. One of these programs, the New Leaders in Conservation, we were able to, at my park, we hired someone as a GS7 visual information specialist just last year. So for a lot of folks, this can be not only a great experience, but a great way to get into a permanent position. We'll talk very briefly about pathways. If you're in school or recently out of school, pathways is definitely something to be aware of. In the old days, this was called the SCEP and the STEP program. It's been replaced by pathways. There are 3 types of pathways positions that exist. There are internships, there's the recent graduate program, and then there's a very prestigious program called the Presidential Management Fellow Program. I don't want to go into too much detail on that just for time, but these are fantastic opportunities. Many folks that are coming in today are coming in through the Pathways program. There are Pathways positions that can non-competitively lead to permanent jobs, and there are others that do not. They're simply temporary positions. But if you're in school or recently out of school, this is definitely something to be aware of. The 21st Century Conservation Service Corps, that's what we used to know as the Public Land Corps. If you spend a total of 640 hours working on one of these qualified youth corps, the age of eligibility is from 16 to 30, and it can be extended up to age 35 for veterans. That gives you eligibility for up to 2 years after the completion of your service. And that can be another avenue, another non-competitive avenue into permanent jobs as well. Schedule A authority is a hiring authority that can be used for seasonal positions as well as for permanent positions. One would need to provide evidence of a severe physical, psychological, or intellectual disability. It needs to be documented by a medical professional. Again, it can lead to both temporary and permanent positions. So if you fall in that category, that might very well be an option for you as well. I know I'm going real fast here, but that's just because we want to leave time for questions. Tim and I will talk a little bit about resumes. I'm sure this will come up in the Q&As. We could do an entire 1-hour session on resumes, so I know this is kind of just a really abbreviated version. What I tried to do here is just pull out a few bullet points that I think are relevant when you're thinking about developing your federal resume. The key thing is that a federal resume is a very different creature than a private sector resume. It's not uncommon, even starting out in your Park Service career, your federal resume might be 2, 3, 4 pages long. When you get closer to my age with more gray hair, it's not uncommon to have a 15 or 18-page resume because there's a lot of very specific documentation that you're going to want to include in there. I do think there's value in tailoring your resume to the specific vacancy announcement. It's probably not going to change tremendously from one job to another, but if you're applying to a resource job versus, say, an intern job, there may be different things that you want to emphasize in your resume. The 4th bullet down really is an important one. One of the purposes of your resume is to support the ratings that you give yourself in the occupational questionnaire. So if you say that you're, if you give yourself a D or an E, if you give yourself the highest rating in, say, operating a canoe, somewhere in your resume, it's going to need to give an example of where you gained that experience. So that's part of why the resume needs to be so long, is that you need to document and back up the ratings that you give yourself in the self-assessment. The next bullet, anytime you can give a specific example, say that you did a program for 50 people and you gave safety messages, or you did a 1-hour historic house tour, any specifics that can give HR and give the hiring official a better sense of what it is you did and the complexity of what you did, that will definitely be a big help. You want your resume to be thorough, and yet you want it to be easy to read. Chances are your resume could be one of 100 or 200 or more that are being read. So you want to be comprehensive, but make it readable, make the font large enough, use bullets. Anything that you can do to enhance the readability is going to be a big help. The next slide is just a sample. This actually comes from a Park Service career guide. I believe it's from 2013, so it's a little bit dated, but this was their sample of what a federal resume might look like. And mine is actually structured fairly similar to this, where you put in your name at the top, the vacancy information, your education, any relevant coursework, and then you start going into detail on the different types of experience that you have. In this sample, they did use bullets, and I think you can see those bullets really, really come in handy. It's a whole lot easier for the reader. I've read resumes where it's like reading a novel, and it's just when you have a lot to go through, anything you can do to make it easier on the reader is definitely going to work in your favor. This is actually a full guide. My email address will be at the end, and Tim's will be available as well. We can certainly send this to you, but this is just I think a good sample of what a thorough yet a readable resume might look like. All right, so we're going to do a little variation to wrap it up as kind of a top 10 list of some of the tips that that I found may be helpful and may very well not be helpful to you. So we'll start out with the one that I accidentally skipped right there, a few tips for your NPS career. And there's a big asterisk, a big disclaimer that goes with this. I'm one person. I've only worked at a fraction of the 421 units of the National Park System. So your experience may vary, and some of the things that Tim and I are sharing may or may not be applicable to your situation. So that's going to be the advice that I would give throughout the day. Take whatever nuggets you can, and some of it feel free to discard, because that's just, one person's perspective. But with that, we'll jump in. Tip number one, especially early in your career, if you're able to volunteer, this can sometimes be a great opportunity. It's a way of getting a little bit of a sample of what the National Park Service is all about. If there's a very specific career field that you want to work in, it might be hard to break in a paid position, but it might be a little bit easier to get some experience as a volunteer. I did some work in a museum collection as a volunteer. That's probably not a position that I would have qualified for as a seasonal, but by doing it as a volunteer, that was a way that I was able to broaden my experience there. Of course, the Park Service has the Volunteer in Parks program and the Student Conservation Association. That's how I started my career back in 1991. There are many, many other options, but I just put those out there. If you're able to volunteer, if you're able to make it work financially, and it doesn't need to be full-time. Even some parks will take just a few hours a week, and that could be a great way to get some experience. Tip number two, if you can be mobile, that always gives you more options. The more opportunity you have, the more mobile you are, the more jobs you can put in for. So the picture on the right is actually in the hallway as you walk into my house. My wife and I have a compilation of some of the places we've worked at over the years. I think Kentucky and Mississippi and a few others are missing, but that's really one of the fun things about the Park Service is being able to go different places. At the same time, it's not essential. Lots of people have wonderful careers, more or less staying in one place. There's no one right formula, but if you are mobile, that's just going to open up a lot more avenues for you. The third tip is I would encourage you to be open to other disciplines. After doing this now for almost 30 years, I really firmly believe that no National Park Service job is more important than any other. Every single job, what everybody does, is critical to the success. The public may not see all of those positions equally, but they're all very, very important. So sometimes positions like fee collection, working in administration, working in maintenance. If you have trade skills, we are always in need of folks with those skills. We tend to think of ranger positions and natural resource positions and things like that. And those are wonderfully fun jobs, but there are a lot of other ways that you can contribute to the National Park Service. So if you have interest in those fields, I would definitely keep that option open. And tip number 4 is kind of a variation on that. I would encourage you to work in different types of parks. Early in my career, I was mostly out west. I worked at Carlsbad Caverns. I worked at Grand Canyon. I worked at some of the large traditional parks. I really wanted to have the experience of an urban setting. And so I took a seasonal job working at the National Mall, which was an amazing experience. I learned so much about history. I learned about a great city in Washington, D.C., and I had the chance to experience a very different facet of the National Park Service. So the more you have in your background in terms of different types of parks, natural versus historical, urban areas versus more remote areas, large parks versus small parks, again, the broader the experience you have, the better off you are. And that segues into number 5. especially when life starts getting a little more complicated, when you may be thinking about a spouse's career or significant other's career. Down the road, you may be thinking about elderly parents or childcare issues or whatever the case may be. The more skills you have, the broader your skill set, the more options you're going to have, the more marketable you can make yourself. It always works in your favor. It works in your favor career-wise, but I also think it makes us stronger as an organization, because the more I understand about what other people do, the better understanding I have of the Park Service as a whole. So I would encourage you every chance you get, whether it be details, whether it be just helping out another division for an afternoon, there's always value in doing that. Tip number 6, considering a cover letter. Some hiring officials love them, other hiring officials hate them. So it could work for you. It could work. I don't think it'll work against you, but it may or may not be a plus. The one thing I would say, if you do a cover letter, is tailor it to the job that you're applying for. I've seen cover letters where somebody says, I'm a results-oriented professional, and I've always wanted to work for the Forest Service, and that's great. That's a wonderful agency, but we're not the Forest Service. And anything that's generic like that is probably not going to help. On the other hand, if you did your senior thesis in geology and you're applying for a job at Grand Canyon, that may be something that you want to highlight in a cover letter. So it's very case by case, but that may be something that you consider in some cases. Tip number 7, I think this applies at any stage of your career, whether you're a volunteer or seasonal or permanent or a senior executive. I think it's true at any level, just being persistent. I look back on my seasonal time, honestly, as being some of the best years of my career. I got to see places that I never would have seen. I got to explore parts of the country that I wouldn't have seen, got to meet and learn from a lot of amazing people along the way. If you're a seasonal and if it takes you a while to get in, I know it can be frustrating. I know it can be discouraging, but it's really your trial period. It's a chance to see, is this what I want to do for a career? And if it is, by the time you get that permanent job, you could have some very, very robust experience that will really serve you very well. Tip number 8, this one is a little bit more obsolete nowadays, but you may want to consider getting a permanent job with another agency. Sometimes, 30 years ago in my day, people would go to the IRS or they would go to other federal agencies to look for permanent jobs. There's some risk in doing that, because when you jump to another agency, in some cases, you might have trouble getting back in. But if that stability is important, if you're needing that permanent job, might be something to look at, because it would get your foot in the door and then give you the ability to apply back to the National Park Service, already being in a permanent position. Tip number 9, going back to our title, it's a menu. There is such a broad array of options in a National Park Service career. I grew up in the 80s with choose your own adventure books, to enter the cave, turn to page 35 kind of thing. The Park Service is like that. There are so many different options out there. I think that is one of the advantages that you have as a seasonal, is the chance to explore so many different options. So I would encourage you to check out lots of different options, go to different types of parks, try to think outside your comfort zone, and talk to lots of people along the way. Try to get different perspectives. If there's somebody you admire, somebody who's had a career path that you think you might want, talk to them, find out what they would do differently and what they feel went well, and you really learn a lot. And then my last note there, feel free to disregard advice. We all look at things through our own filter. You may find something that's like, I get that, but I don't really think that's relevant to me. Kind of cherry pick what you need, and you may learn quite a bit along the way. And then the final thing I'll mention, the value of a mentor. I think this is true at every level in your career. It can be a formal mentor as part of a structured mentoring program, and it can be an informal mentor. It can be somebody you just keep in touch with from time to time. I think one of the great benefits of being an ANPR member is to take advantage of the mentoring program. Those are folks who can help make connections. They may very well have been down the same road that you're wanting to go down, and it's a great way to meet some fantastic people and to learn some things along the way. The final thing I'll mention, having done this for a while, is to find that right balance. And that balance is going to be different for everyone else. I will say, having been around the service, we work in some amazing places, and yet at the same time, we have some people who are not very happy. The Park Service can be hard on a person's personal life. Some of the sacrifices that we need to make for the job can be a challenge, and I would encourage you to keep that in perspective, to keep that balance. There's going to be a presentation tomorrow talking about dual careers. If you haven't experienced the challenges of dual careers, that may be something that you encounter in the future. And again, everybody finds their own path. There is no one right balance. I'm not even sure that I've totally found it myself, but I will say that it's something you want to be aware of and make sure that you're looking out for your own mental health and for those around you, because it can be hard on us and it can be hard on families as well. So just be aware of that, and like so many things, especially in this crazy time, take care of yourself and make sure that you're taking a balanced perspective on what it is you want in your life. All right. I wanted to make sure that you have our contact information. Both Tim and I are more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. We still have another 30 plus minutes where we do want to take your questions, but most importantly, things may come to you down the road. At this point, I would like to open it up to all of you. Jamie, are you going to be our Q&A moderator?
I am. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Tim. First, Tim, I'd like to direct a question to you. As someone who is a hiring manager and as someone who reviews resumes and conducts interviews, do you have any tips for everyone out there who's either preparing a resume for their next job or getting ready for an interview?
Yeah, so we decided to let Ken take kind of the start of the presentation, because I even though Ken was once an interpreter, he's moved into admin, so knows how to stop talking when necessary. I don't yet. I'm still an interp, so feel free to cut me off if I go too long. And now that I've already done a tangent, back to the question. The biggest thing to remember is that when you're putting together your resume, as Ken mentioned a little bit, remember the hiring official is going to be seeing dozens, if not hundreds of them. And most of them are going to be very similar. As Ken mentioned, you want to specify within your resume and kind of tailor it to the job. Well, everyone else is going to be doing that as well. So putting a line in a resume, something to the effect of, I worked in a visitor center operation for 3 years. That's great, but that exact same line is going to be in 200 other resumes. So what did you do working in that visitor center that was unique? Did you create a new scheduling system that made the work more efficient? Did you rearrange the bookstore in a way that increased sales? Something that's unique and above and beyond what we're actually asking for you to do. And yeah, as Ken said, bullet points make it simple, particularly at the sort of entry level. So those of you that are looking at, GS5s, GS7s, bullet points are good because, quite frankly, if you give me an entire essay and you've only been a seasonal for 1 season, I really question how much you're rating yourself. How could you have really done all that in a single season? And the other thing I really, really recommend, similar to the template that Ken gave, is particularly at the entry level, even though it's annoying and it's not user-friendly at all, the USA Jobs Resume Builder. It's a pain. You will curse at your computer multiple times while you try to fill it out, but it asks for every piece of information we require. The number of people who are deemed ineligible because they didn't put the number of hours worked. It sounds ridiculous, but that is a required element. And when you do the USA Jobs Resume Builder, it will warn you that you haven't filled something out. And I have had that happen where I missed out on jobs because I missed a checkbox or something, and it's not fun. And that's an easy thing that, just taking that second look, making sure all the blanks are filled out is really worth it in the long run.
Tim, building off that last comment, as a hiring manager, do you prefer to have resumes in a USA Jobs resume format, or do you prefer to have them in Word or another more visually appealing format? I've heard some hiring managers go both ways. So what's your tip?
So what I actually do with my own resume is it's a Word document, but I have the USA Jobs resume builder pulled up and I follow it like a checklist. So it's formatted like the USA Jobs resume builder, but it's physically exists in a Word document, so it's easier to manipulate. Personally, I like that because, again, there are those things we're looking for, and I already know where they are on USA Jobs, so I know where your job title is going to be. I know where your supervisor is going to be. When folks create their own, it might look more appealing and look more professional in many cases, quite frankly. But then I have to hunt for the information I'm looking for. And when I've got 200 more to go and a meeting coming up in 30 minutes, you don't want me having to hunt for anything.
Thank you for that. And we'll direct this next question to both panelists. When applying for positions at the same grade or series I'm at currently, I've been considered not qualified due to some of my experience at a lower grade level. Is this due to standard PDs or new hiring procedures? Do you know? Ken, can you unmute yourself?
So I would say it's probably not an actual new procedure or new policy. It sounds like it's probably the way in which possibly the way it's written. So normally when we're looking at it, we look at top down basically. So if your biggest job block, if you will, is what you have at the top, and that was a lower grade, that'll normally be the first thing we look at. And if that experience doesn't line up with the new job, kind of like I mentioned before, having to hunt in another job entry is going to make it a little harder to find.
And we've got a question come in. Do you have any advice or tips for phone interviews? Anything that either as a person who's done a phone interview or someone who's on the receiving end evaluating a phone interview, do you have any tips?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So I think one of the things that I've tried to keep in mind for phone interviews is to not be spooked by silence. A lot of times the person on the other end, or if it's a panel, they're just they're taking notes as they go. They're probably asking standard questions to each person. So not to be too unsettled by the silence. I think for me, it's just one of those things to keep in mind to. As an interpreter, I would always draw some of my strength from the audience. And in a phone interview, you don't have that. You don't have people smiling. You don't have facial expressions. And I know in the beginning I would think, oh my gosh, I must be saying something horrible. And the chances are they're just taking notes, and they may be having expressions, but you can't see that through the phone. So I would say not to be not to be troubled and not to be unsettled by that. Tim, did you have any?
Yeah, very, very similar. I will never forget, I was sharing an office with another supervisor who was doing phone interviews once. And I'm a Star Trek fan. If any of you know who Data is, he doesn't have any emotion. He's retired now, but Manny was a great guy. He asked every candidate every question in the most deadpan way ever. And he would get off the phone with one and say, we're hiring them. That's definite. Get off the phone with the next one and say, oh my God, that was terrible. So, but Manny, you didn't say anything different. He was like, well, I know that's their job, not mine. So that's always, don't let the tone of the interviewer kind of psych you out, because it's very easy to have happen. And on a related note, another thing, a lot of us have, I wouldn't necessarily call them trick questions, but we have questions often that The answer you think you should give probably isn't the right one. The one I always include is tell me about a time you had conflict with a coworker. The correct answer, if you will, is to acknowledge usually a minor conflict that you had and then explain how you worked through it. To me, if you say, oh, I've never had a conflict with a coworker, I get along with everybody. It's like, okay, not hiring you because you're either delusional that you get along perfectly with everybody, or you're intentionally misleading me. Then again, on the other side, if you say, oh yeah, I had this one coworker I just hated, and the best way I could deal with her was just to ignore her. Okay, that's wrong in the other direction as well. So acknowledging that you have had struggles is a really good thing, but more importantly is showing your process on how you resolve them.
Thank you, Tim. That's a great tip. Another question's come in. Do I need to have a college degree in order to get a job as a park ranger?
So the short answer is no, you are not required to, unless it's one of the sciences that may require it. But it's not going to hurt. You know, when I'm hiring, I usually hire GS5s in my day job on the National Mall. And even though, you know, a lot of people think, oh, it's just a park guide, entry level, I'd say half, if not more, of my candidates usually have a bachelor's, if not a master's degree. And unless the job is announced as being education-based, which we don't do that very often anymore, it's not required. We certainly look at that. You know, it's in the resume. If I were to be given somebody who's got 10 years of seasonal experience versus somebody who just graduated, I'm probably going to go with the seasonal experience over the degree. But if there's no college and no experience, that becomes a harder sell for me.
Ken, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Tim and I have done these long enough that we're kind of on the same page on a lot of things. Yeah, as he mentioned, there are a handful of positions that have what are called positive educational requirements, and that would be, as he mentioned, primarily the sciences. Certainly a degree helps. It's very competitive. For many positions, there are a lot of folks applying, so it will probably help. But if you do not, I would not let that discourage you, because the majority of NPS positions actually do not require that. And there are folks who have had very, very successful careers without it. So don't let that be a barrier.
And Ken, I'll direct this next question to you. Would you recommend reaching out to specific parks that you're interested in, either working for, at, and seeing if there are any opportunities available? Would reaching out to a park directly on an informational basis help set me apart?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is it will probably vary for every hiring official, but I think in general, yes, I would encourage you to do that. I took a year off from college. That's how I got started in the Park Service, and I was actually cold calling parks, basically saying, I'm available, I'm able to volunteer, do you have housing? Some parks called me back. Some didn't, but the park that did call me back was Carlsbad Caverns, and I went on to volunteer there and spend 5 seasons there and meet my wife there. So, you know, a lot of good things came from some of those calls. I do think there's value in that. Especially if there's a certain park, a certain career field, it's always helpful to reach out. And that way, as Tim said, when your name is on that list of maybe 100 or 200 other people, that might make your name stand out.
Thank you. And we've got a question specific on the LMWFA. When applying for a position via LMWFA, what sort of documents do you need to have submitted? And do you specifically have to say you're applying through this program to qualify?
Yeah, so on the last part, yes, there is literally a checkbox on the USA Jobs job announcement. It's usually on the front page along with about 50 other special considerations and things, and check that that page multiple times before you click on. But document-wise, the two kind of big standards are SF50s, because again, you only qualify for it if you've had 2 years of experience already. So when you're doing a seasonal gig, make sure you get that onboard and your offboard SF50s. You got to have copies of those. You've got to upload them, and then your EPAPs as well. So nowadays, most parks have gotten with the program of doing a full EPAP for all seasonals. There are still some that begrudgingly do it or only do the in lieu of EPAP, which is basically a letter that says, yes, X employee worked between these 2 dates and did an acceptable level of performance. Those are still out there. If you're in a park that's still doing that, get that letter. It will count in lieu of, but it will probably lead to a little bit more stringent interview questioning if there's no narrative EPAP for us then to look at. But yeah, if you're looking at that, it doesn't hurt. You can check that box saying you're going for land management, while at the same time, if you qualify under any other authority, you can be on multiple lists, if you will. And in fact, several times, I've wound up hiring somebody off of one list when I didn't actually consider them on another one. Just because one list might be stronger than another. And as a hiring official, we get a whole plethora of different things to consider. So yeah, being on there multiple times is a good thing. And we usually like having previous Park Service experience. That's almost never a required thing. But if I get somebody who's using land management authority, I look at what those appointments were. Were they all with the Park Service? Did they change it up some? Did they have 2 years or a year and a half with the Park Service and 1 season with fish? That could be good to have a different experiences to bring to the table. So yeah, document.
We've got another land management question. I've heard that you can use the Land Management Act hiring authority at non-land management agencies. Do you know if this is true?
It is true. I'll try to say this concisely. The experience that you use to qualify for the 24 months must have been gained at one of the 6 land management agencies: Forest Service, Park Service, BLM, a couple others. However, you're absolutely correct. It does apply at any federal agency. Now, the challenge is, I think it's a little bit less of an issue now because the act is 5 years old at this point, but sometimes the HR departments, from what I'm hearing in other agencies, may not be as familiar with it. We all know it, everybody in the HR world and the Park Service knows the Land Management Act. I think that may not be the case everywhere. So there may be some value in putting that in a prominent place toward the top of your resume and saying gained eligibility under the Land Management Workforce Flexibility Act. I think everybody's in the heart is in the right place, but some of the other HR and other agencies may not be aware of that. But yes, it does qualify.
Thank you. Do computers still read resumes to pick up catchwords?
I don't know if it's specifically computers that do it, but I can tell you that the keyword search is still a thing. Something I actually just very recently learned is the importance of scrolling down to the bottom of the job announcement and seeing what HR organization is doing the rating for your resumes. So most of the time that will be the regional HR office. So, one of the 7 that are around the country, what have you. And usually they have at least a basic understanding of what each job kind of duties and responsibilities are. So if it's an internal, it's not as big of a deal about those keywords because the HR professional generally knows what they're reading in your resume. I actually recently applied for one that was being managed directly by OPM. So the HR specialists at OPM don't necessarily know what my job as an interpretive supervisor entails. So they did a keyword search on my resume and deemed I was ineligible, ironically, for the job I'm currently acting in right now. But because I didn't use the keywords they were looking for, even though any NPS personnel could read my resume and say, oh yeah, that's clearly everything they're looking for. Those keywords are still a factor, particularly when it's a non-NPS HR professional reviewing it. So I am updating my resume as we speak, basically. So that is something to keep in mind. That is, I don't like it even before I was the victim of it, but it is still out there, and it is something to keep in mind.
So Tim and Ken both, this is a related question that branches off that idea. I recently applied for a job almost identical to the one I'm currently in, and yet I was found to be unqualified. How can I try to understand why HR found me to be unqualified? Are there any recommendations or tips that you have?
You can contact them. That's how I found out that OPM was doing it for this job instead of the SHRO. If it is your local SHRO, you'll usually be referred to the actual individual HR specialist who did the rating, and they'll be able to tell you. They have basically a checklist, and they can say, well, bullet point number 4, we were looking for experience working cash register at an entrance station or at a bookstore. And you didn't include on your resume that you worked a cash register. So most of the time it'll be as simple as that. If it's a more complex thing, they may refer you to the park itself that was doing the hiring. It's not going to get you on that cert, once it's closed, unless there's something really unique happening, it's closed. But they'll often refer you back to the park, who can give you more of a coaching and a guidance. Like, I don't understand why I was deemed ineligible, and they can normally talk you through it. For instance, one of the responsibilities in my job here, Minuteman is unique in that curatorial was under Division of Interpretation instead of Resource Management, like it is in the majority of parks. So a number of people who applied for this detail were deemed ineligible because they had never worked with curatorial staff before, because that's normally not an interp job. In my experience down on the National Mall, we work with the curators at Ford's Theater quite a bit. So I was able to demonstrate I had that, which is why I was deemed eligible, whereas others who had already, in one case, already been a chief of interpretation elsewhere, were deemed ineligible for what seemed to be the same job.
So we're going to move in a slightly different direction. Do hiring officials give more weight to performance-based awards versus star awards? How important are the performance-based awards for getting the next job?
That's pretty personal preference amongst the hiring officials. For me, I consider EPAPs above almost anything else. So for me, reading somebody's EPAP, the performance as being, exceeds or outstanding, as a higher weight than a star award, because a star award is generally meant for sort of a one-off, one big project or one significant thing, which is great. It's wonderful, but I would rather have somebody who is performing at, a 4 all year long than somebody who just spiked for a 5 just for a very short period. And on that note, when you're uploading EPAPs, if you're at the stage in your career when you can upload an EPAP, upload the whole thing. The number of times I see just the cover page that just has the number score, once you've been in the Park Service a while and been at different parks, you'll notice parks are not consistent. in how they evaluate. So most of my staff consider me a very hard evaluator because I tend to give fully successfuls for almost everybody. Whereas some parks see the evaluation as more the grade school ABCD scale, which it's not. So feel compelled to give 4s and 5s for good work. So I always read the narrative. The narrative to me matters way more than what the numerical score actually is.
Yeah, I would agree completely with Tim on that. I think the narrative really tells the story. I want to see the details of the EPAP because scoring is all over the place and you can't read too much into that. Specifically to the question of would a performance award be rated higher than a star award? I would make sure you cite both of them. I don't necessarily think there's a strong distinction there.
So we've actually had a couple questions come in asking about what kind of credentials or educational experience you need to be a park ranger. Do you need a criminal justice law enforcement degree? Do you need a forestry or resource management degree? So perhaps could you talk about the different opportunities that are available in the Park Service as a park ranger and some of the basic experience or qualifications people need?
Yeah, so there's sort of two levels. There's who wears the green and gray is a park ranger, and that's pretty much everybody who works for the agency. So the general visitor would consider the superintendent, the law enforcement ranger, the interpreter, right down to volunteers in many cases as being a ranger. So really, if you can imagine it, short of maybe a rocket scientist, it's probably in the Park Service somewhere. And heck, if they ever make, the Apollo 11 moon landing a park, then we'll need rocket scientists too. But so really any background could lead you into a career somewhere with the Park Service. There are jobs that have more specific requirements. Like if you want to join the Park Service as a biologist, you need a biology degree. And if you want to come in, what most people probably think of with sort of the law enforcement component is going through. Most people go through a seasonal law enforcement academy. That is there's a handful of colleges around the country that are credentialed by the National Park Service to provide National Park Service law enforcement training. That is, I would say, in the kind of modern era, how the majority of law enforcement rangers come in is through one of those seasonal academies. There are other things they sometimes will transfer from another federal law enforcement agency, but generally it's going through that program. So basically, think of it as going to get essentially an associate's degree in one of these accredited programs. If you're looking kind of in more my wheelhouse in the interpretation side, I have a degree in history. A lot of folks in sort of the urban parks tend to be historians or anthropologists. Interpreters in the big nature parks tend to be more of the science and the environmental education background. So what I would recommend is if you're looking for kind of what field of study would benefit is look up what park you would like to go and work in eventually and send them an email, give them a call, and ask around with the staff there what their trajectories were. I'm supervising somebody here at Minuteman right now who was a TV news anchor before she joined the Park Service. And you might think, how is that related at all? Well, we're interpreters. Our job is to talk to people. So news anchor, that's a pretty good background for what we do. So the opportunities are out there. It's just finding kind of what track you need to go for your specific interest.
I think that's great advice. And I also, one thing to consider is that over the course of your Park Service career, you may work in a lot of different types of places. My degree is in geology, it's in the natural sciences, but as as Tim was talking, I'm just running through my career. I probably worked about a 50-50 split between natural parks and historical parks. So I wouldn't worry too much about it if you're really focused, if park management or geology or history, if that's something you have a passion for, I would go for it. I don't think necessarily that one major over another is going to make that much of a difference in terms of helping you get started.
And we've got time for one last question today. And I want to thank everyone who submitted all these great questions. Our last question is, how do you make it clear to a new park that you are available and ready for rehire?
So
Ken, you're muted.
So just to clarify, I think the question is, if you're interested in using your rehire status at another park, how do you market yourself? Jamie, is that how you're interpreting that? Okay. So I think that ties back. It's a great question. I think it ties a little bit back to what we talked about earlier. I would not be shy about introducing yourself to folks at other parks. Go to the visitor center, talk to people, see if someone's available. If it's a local park, I would encourage you to reach out, make a phone call, send an email. It's a little bit easier now than it was when I was getting started because you have friends on Facebook and ways of keeping connected. The 6 degrees of separation in the Park Service is kind of a fun thing to play. If I want to find a friend of mine who works at Sequoia, I can probably make a few phone calls and make that happen. So talk to your friends. Cold calling is always a little bit uncomfortable, but if all else fails, you could certainly do that. But I would just build your network. I think that's one of the great benefits of Ranger Rendezvous and ANPR and keeping in touch with people is that you may very well be able to get a name of somebody who worked in one of your preferred parks. And I would not be shy when you're visiting a park as a visitor, you go to a campfire program, introduce yourself at the end, take advantage of all those opportunities. Most of them probably won't lead to anything career-wise, but you'll meet some great people along the way. So I'd say you have nothing to lose.
Well, thank you very much to both Tim and Ken. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Do you have any final parting words for everyone this afternoon?
I think the biggest thing is, just keep going for it. Don't let things frustrate you. There'll be bumps, potholes, roadblocks, you name it, that you'll come across both getting into the service and then even when you're years in, you'll still come across things you didn't know about. So keep trying, keep going. Ken just put back up our contacts. So feel free to reach out if you want to chat more. And yeah, never be afraid to ask questions. Questions are a good thing.
Thank you everyone for tuning in today and have a great rest of your afternoon. We look forward to seeing you at the afternoon sessions of Ranger Rendezvous 43. This afternoon we have the Yosemite Riot coming up. So please, you don't want to miss that. It's going to be a really great conversation. Thank you again to Tim and Ken, and thank you